Hi. Chapter 2. Takis Victory. Takis stepped into the cold wind from his old friend's restaurant with a belly full of warm rice and green tea. He smiled from the sun's warmth now prevalent in the cold city. He didn't have a destination, so he turned his back from the biting wind and headed towards the sun. This direction would lead him towards the wharf where he could watch the men load or unload all the things that the boats brought to and from the city. There were endless things to watch, which could entertain a young boy his age, and also this was a place where he was never questioned why he wasn't in school. Sometimes the men would joke with him as one of their own and maybe even share a bite or two of their lunches. The wind howled and pushed him further along his way. The morning melee had died down somewhat, and Takis could walk easily through the small parade of city folk. His mind wandered through his imagination as his steps brought him along his jungle home. This kept him from noticing all the advertisements and storefronts that contained the things of want. His joyful spirit was enlivened with a full belly as the hunger pains and food worry was silenced from his simple breakfast. He started to skip and sing. This sight was contrary to the seriousness of all the rest that walked and plodded along Central Avenue. Takis was a boy again. He could play as his mission for the day was completed. This could last a few more hours until evening, when it was time to decide where he would curl up and hide from the dangers of the city and try to rest safely for the night. He was small for his age, and this afforded many places of refuge from the bigger folks that had ill intent. Often he'd find a hole in a subway tunnel or a crack between two buildings where the wind would howl but lessen its bite. Takis kept his compass aimed towards the river's docks. The closer he had gotten to his destination, the less people he saw. The traffic sounds faded into the background of his song. He sang, "There is one who loves me, there is one above me, this I know in my heart, for he's the one with the day I start. He's the one that loves me so, for he's the one that told me so." Takis sang this over many times until it became a hum. The hum became less and less as his feeling of love increased. Then he thought he heard a sharp bark coming from somewhere, but he did not know where. Takis paused his song and listened. This wait lasted many minutes, and as he started to hum his loving praise, he heard it again, this time a little louder. He froze. He knew it was a dog calling for help, although he didn't know where it was coming from. Then again he heard the muffled bark crying for help. Takis looked around. There were not many people, and those that were nearby were engrossed in their phones or they had earphones drowning out the city sounds. Again a bark. Takis checked behind the dumpster. He climbed it to look in. No dog there. He went back to where he had heard the loudest bark. He looked down, and at his feet there was a metal grate that protected the storm water drain from debris and inattentive pedestrians from falling inside. He crouched down to peer into the dark depths. There he saw two shining eyes looking up at him. There was a bark of recognition from a tiny dog trapped below. Takis smiled, and immediately he had found his midday mission. But how to remove the storm grate? It was far too big and heavy for him. Maybe I could squeeze down through the big hole, he thought to himself. He tried, and although small himself, he was much too big. He went back to the alley to look for a tool of some sort. He remembered hearing someone say, "If you had a big enough lever, you could lift the entire world." He found only some small pieces of broken pallet wood near the garbage pile. "This is not big enough of lever," he said aloud. Takis went back to the drain and gazed into the dark hole. "What should I do?" he asked the dog. The tiny pup started to bark loudly and over as if it was coaching Takis to the solution of rescue. Takis had an idea. He said, "I'll be right back," to the dog. This was met with one bark of assurance that this was so. Takis ran to the docks. He ran to the boatmen, up a ramp and onto the nearest boat where men were working. In his rush, he ran headfirst into the belly of a sailor and bounced backwards to land on the ship's deck. "Hey there, little fella. You got to be careful running around here. You ain't going to hurt me none, but you could crack your head open bouncing around like that," the sailor joked. Takis looked up from the deck to see a man as tall as a light pole, with shoulders as wide as a taxi. The sailor's hands were bigger than his plate of rice that held his breakfast. "Excuse me, mister. I was wondering if you could help me and my dog," Takis sputtered out. "Well, it depends. What kind of help do you and your dog need?" the sailor answered. "Well, he isn't my dog," Takis said as he rose up from the ship's deck. "He is trapped in the storm drain, and I need help rescuing him," Takis pleaded. The sailor stood and looked at the boy with his steel blue eyes. He rubbed his red bearded chin with his massive hands. "Well, seeing we just finished loading this old skiff here, and I was headed off for supper, I suppose I could see what a drain dog and a boy with good intent could do for an old sea dog myself that's looking for an adventure or two," he said to Takis. "Jim Hardy's my name, and what they be calling you, son?" the man asked. "My name is Takis. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Hardy. Will you help me?" "Us?" Takis asked with the nobility of a prince. "Now don't go on Mister and me, boy. My name's Jim, but my friends call me Skip, as I'm the captain of this old boat, and her name is the Brightest Star. She ain't much, but she's mine and has been for as long as I can remember," Skip replied with his eyes shining as his hands patted the sideboard of the old boat. "Mr. Jim," Takis started. "Skip will do, since we're friends and all," Jim stated. "And a friend in need is a friend indeed. Now where's this drain dog?" he asked Takis with his deep, rumbling belly laugh. "Just up the dock and half a block from here, right on the corner of Central Avenue and Beale Street," Takis excitedly spurred. Skip and Takis left the Brightest Star and headed towards the rescue. Takis led his new friend like a seasoned guide through the city. It wasn't long before they heard the barks of joy from the dog below. Takis asked Skip, "What shall we do? The grate is too big to move and—" At that moment, Skip bent down and wrapped his gloved hands around the grate and pulled upwards with a powerful thrust, and there before Takis's eyes was an empty hole with no grate anymore preventing rescue. Takis stood awestruck as Skip smiled, and he laid the grate to the side. Skip then took from his back pocket a length of rope that Takis had not noticed before, and he began to tie a knot in one end. Then he handed the rope to the boy. "Go ahead and hoist that scupper pup out of the hole," Skip said with his deep laugh. Takis took the rope and carefully lowered it to the tiny dog. As the rope's knot came near the dog, he began barking excitedly. The dog spun in circles as if he was dancing for joy. The rope met the bottom of the drain, and the dog amazingly entered into the knot and waited. "Heave ho!" Skip shouted with zest. With this, Takis pulled on the rope. The knot cinched around the dog, and up he came with each tug from Takis. Skip's laughter fueled the boy's work. Finally, Takis had his tiny new friend in his arms and removed the rope to hand it back to Skip. Everyone was elated. Skip's laughter echoed in the street. Takis's dirty-faced smile spread from ear to ear, and drain dogs barking sounded his thanks for salvation. Skip picked up the grate and placed it carefully over the drain. He took off his glove and asked Takis, "Well, what's his name? Every good sea dog needs a name." Takis's eyes were fixed on the dog, as many boys are when they embrace for the first time. "I don't know," Takis said. Then he looked down at the massive drain grate, and printed in the cast iron was the manufacturer's name. It read, "Victory Casting Company." "His name is Victory," Takis beamed. "That's a fine name and title for such a hardy little fellow. What do you say we head to supper? But before we do, let's get him cleaned up. We can't have the guest of honor at our celebration feast stinking like a sewer," Skip declared in his deep laughter. The three of them headed back to Skip's boat and washed Victory in a metal tub filled with hot soapy water. Afterwards, Skip brought Takis to the shower house on board the Brightest Star, so he too could remove the sewer smell he had been carrying with him for some time. Takis had found some clothes laid out for him on the sink stand after he'd gotten out of the shower. There was a wool jacket also, the kind like a real sailor wears. Takis got dressed and put on the coat. The warmth of the shower stayed with him once he was wrapped in the coat that was a few sizes too big. Then he made his way to the galley. As Takis entered the kitchen, he was met with a wonderful smell and a scruffy-looking dog with shining eyes and a grateful yip of excitement. Skip was busy over a crock-pot, the source of the heavenly aroma, with a ladle in one hand and a bowl in the other. Takis bent down, and Victory jumped into his arms. The dog nuzzled Takis and buried himself in his new warm coat. "I'm glad to see that my son's old clothes and sea coat fits you, Takis. There looks to be ample room for your new partner, Victory." Skip's belly laughed this truth. The table was set, and each ate their fill of the stew that waited all day for them to enjoy its savory nourishment. The two friends enjoyed their canine company long into the evening. Victory loved the attention from his new friends, too. When the cold settled into the wharf, Skip shut up the hatches of the Brightest Star, and his guests drift off to sleep while they rocked to and fro from the waves of the river that surrounded the jungle that Takis and Victory called home.